Quand je suis devant la glace, j'ai l'impression d'être devant quelqu'un qui me ressemble et qui revient très loin.
Estoy hecha a tu medida. Y acabas de decirme que te gusto. Sé que me miras.
Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi, where we journey through the many subgenres of science fiction on screen. I'm one of your hosts, James.
And I'm Matt. This series, we're exploring the sci-fi subgenre of mad science. And in today's episode, we will be looking at Eyes Without a Face from 1960 and The Skin I Live In from 2011. From brains to faces and skin.
We also have a special guest, don't we, Matt?
We do. We are joined once again by our friend of the show, the host of Evolution of Horror, the co-host of Zap to the Future, and Successionistas and Peak TV, and Hello Sydney, and Back Row Podcast, and many more that I'm sure I'm forgetting. It's Mike Muncer. Welcome back, Mike.
Thank you. That was a lovely intro. I love that. I'm not actually Mike. I'm someone else just wearing Mike's face, but it's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, Mike, it's great to have you back on the show. So, as Matt alluded to, you've got hundreds of different podcasts going out at the moment at all times, all hours of the day, all days of the week. So you're a very busy guy. So thank you very much for spending a bit of time with us to talk mad science.
Oh my God. Thank you for having me. I've always got time to come and chat to you guys, and especially about these two films. I'm a big fan of this subgenre and of these movies generally. So I'm very excited.
So to kick things off, as we are doing our mad science series, how do you feel about mad science? Because last time we had you on and we were talking about space opera and you were like, space opera's not your fave.
No.
Is mad science your fave when it comes to subgenres of sci-fi?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably no surprise to anyone who knows me and what I like, i.e. horror, that I'm going to be a big fan of this particular season because you guys are doing a lot of really fun horror stuff, right? I think there's a big sci-fi horror crossover when it comes to mad science, like obviously the big texts like Frankenstein and everything, but then everything from kind of Cronenbergian body horror to the stuff that we're doing today. Like, I love it all. This is, for me, some of my absolute favorite sci-fi stuff.
So we get this kind of blending of like the ethics of the experimentation, but sometimes we see the real horror of it. Do you think that horror is more leaning into the scarier aspects of it? Or do you think there's more overlap between the two?
Yeah, I guess like the whole thing can be tinged with horror no matter what, right? Because a lot of the time it's kind of a warning about, you know, if you mess with forces you shouldn't be, there will be consequences, right? That tends to be the case in a lot of these movies. But I guess the ones that are more on the end of the horror spectrum really get to have fun with and lean into those consequences, right? The monsters, the body horror. I feel like it's quite a kind of visceral, abject kind of subgenre when it comes to the horror, because often, you know, when you think of films like The Fly or recent movies like The Substance, they really lean into just like the grotesquerie of science and what it can do to our bodies, right, as well. So I think so often like the movies in this subgenre that are at the more sort of horror end of the spectrum really don't shy away from the kind of gratuitous side effects, I guess, and consequences of science.
Yeah, we talked a lot about how they're playing, the scientists are playing God, and sometimes in these films it feels like that particular transgression is so morally severe that then the punishment that comes back to them, nothing's off limits. So then you can really get into some disgusting stuff in what happens to the mad scientist that transgresses in that way.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well because these two films are quite interesting in the different ways they tackle it, actually, because Eyes Without a Face, you've got a very, very explicit scene of body horror, like a surgery scene that was really kind of groundbreaking and ahead of its time for 1960. And then The Skin I Live In actually feels a little bit more like it's relying more on its ideas than it's kind of like gore or jump scares or anything like that to scare us as well. But I think they're both dealing with the same kinds of themes.
I think what's interesting about both of them and the majority of the mad science films we've been looking at is they feature transformation as a heavy part of the story. It's all about characters changing and becoming something different. And that's one of the key things we found about Mad Science as well. You've got these crazy experiments which lead to unforeseen circumstances, but there's always some sort of transformation in the characters. And that's where this sort of ethic stuff comes into play. Have they gone too far? Like Matt said, they're playing gods. Where is the line in these experiments, and how far will these people potentially go?
And I think particularly with Hollywood and with American cinema, especially kind of classic cinema, it was always quite kind of if you play God, i.e. if you are in some way doing something that could be considered quite blasphemous, you are going to get punished for it, right? There is this kind of ultimate kind of slightly conservative message, which is like, don't mess with nature, don't mess with God's creations, basically. Don't try and fly too close to the sun, or else you're going to be punished in usually a pretty nasty way.
But that's how science progresses, isn't it? You need you need to push further in order to do it. You need to push the boundaries. But it's just,
you sound like one of these mad scientists. This is dangerous talk, man.
I mean, that's how all big scientific discoveries come through some sort of crazy experiment. We've talked about all the different mad scientists we see, from like the crackpots in their sheds and garages to the ones in grand Transylvanian mansions in all these gothic situations. You've got like real scientists are still pushing the boundaries in different ways, but it's got these kind of folktale aspects to it, hasn't it? All of these are warning messages, like you say, don't go too far. But then the science side of it is like, if you go this far, then you're going to make a big discovery and it'll be quite interesting. But there's moral dilemmas attached to all of this.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and it goes back all the way back, and I think that's something that feels quite prevalent right now. I watched a film about 2 weeks ago at the cinema called Companion. Have you guys seen that? There's very much a kind of, I feel like, and I know you guys did this in your very first season, right? But there's a lot of kind of AI horror at the moment and technology, but in a way that all kind of loops in with that idea of science, isn't it? And kind of like how our creations can be pushed too far, basically, and can be our downfall. So yeah, it is. I think it's definitely something that everyone is kind of thinking about right now.
So have you got any favourite films in the mad science subgenre, or favourite mad scientists themselves?
Ooh, I mean, Seth Brundle and The Fly, I think is one of my all-time favourite films. I think you guys talked about that on my podcast, in fact.
We did. You're not sure. You've done so many episodes, you can't recall.
It was quite a few years ago now, But yeah, we did, didn't we? And I think we were all in agreement that is like basically a perfect film, right? It kind of ticks all the boxes. That character is incredible. The message behind it is incredible. Like, it's a very simple story, but just done to perfection. I think when it comes to mad science, I think David Cronenberg generally is kind of the master at it for me.
That's a good shout. Yeah, we all enjoyed that. I believe your episode, we ended by, we all shook hands and just said, good movie.
Good movie, yeah.
Well done, everyone. Well done.
Well done.
Well, shall we get into the topic of today's podcast then? These two films which we're going to be looking at. Let's start with Eyes Without a Face from 1960.
Maintenant tu as ton beau visage. Ton vrai visage. Tu vas pouvoir revivre.
C'est vrai.
So, what are both of your experiences with this film? This was my first time watching it, and I didn't know exactly what to expect. I'd read the synopsis, and we'd paired them together. But as always, it's always a treat when we get into something which we've never seen before. So what were your two experiences of this film?
I'll go first quickly because I'd never seen it before. It was my first time as well. And I hadn't even read a synopsis. I knew nothing about it. James, you paired these films up. Mike, you said, oh, come on for that episode. Those are good films. And I was like, great, I don't need to think about these movies till I watch them. So I was going in completely blind to both films. But Mike, what's your history with Eyes Without a Face?
I first came to it probably about 10, 15 years ago. And I think especially when I was kind of really diving deep into wanting to watch all of the big horror classics, this movie is always up there. It's always on lists of like one of the all-time great, not just kind of horror films, but just films generally, actually. Like, there are critics like, for example, Mark Kermode, who have championed it for years and kind of put it in their top 10 movies of all time. And I knew it had this reputation as being quite creepy, but also quite beautiful and really well made. And I was covering it in my body horror series, the same series as The Fly, and so I really looked into it properly then as well. And just as an interesting kind of early body horror film, an interesting early mad science film, but also a kind of interesting early sort of prelude to French horror cinema, which is, again, known for being quite brutal and quite unflinching. And this is a kind of very early example of that.
So it's got your quintessential mad science in this film, hasn't it? You've got this mad scientist, Dr. Genesier, who he feels like he's got all of the typical mad scientist tropes. And when I was watching this, I kept thinking of Dr. Moreau, because there's lots of comparisons in this to this doctor and Dr. Moreau. I think they're both sort of like on the same kind of line. They're doing these crazy experiments. But how did you guys feel about him as a figure and what he gets up to in this film?
I think he's a little bit more relatable and fragile than Dr. Moreau. He hasn't quite got the egomania of Dr. Moreau, but I could see this almost being like a prequel to Dr. Moreau, like, you know, send this guy off to an island. I'm sure he could develop the ego and go all that way and become that kind of figure on the island. But he's got this slightly more tragic and relatable backstory. He is trying to help someone. It's not all just about glory unto his own abilities, but he also does have that element of like self-belief and ego, and he wants to fix things, and he believes that he's uniquely capable of fixing things, and that's what leads him down this route of transgression and playing God. And he's definitely a playing God type of mad scientist, isn't he? Taking lives to fix something in someone he loves.
He's quite a sort of calm character, though, isn't he? I don't know, when you think in your head of like the quote-unquote mad scientist,
yeah,
you think of like, I don't know, just a bit more like out there, crazy kind of people, or you think of Dr. Frankenstein being like, it's alive and stuff, and he's not at all like that, actually. And this whole film has that vibe, really, because it is in some ways a kind of mad scientist. Like, when you hear the story, like this mad scientist is abducting women and cutting off their faces, it sounds like it's going to be much more, I don't know, like an exploitation movie or a B movie than it is, I think, as well. There's something really interesting about it that almost feels like in this day and age, people might call it like an elevated horror, right? Like it's
your favorite.
Yeah. And it was even at the time, it was quite a difficult film, I think, for like sort of the marketing companies to kind of classify. When it was released at the time in English language, I think in the UK, they changed the title to The Horror Chamber of Dr. Faustus, which is really funny.
Wow.
Like, again, like trying
Pretty
to
good.
market it more to be like this, I guess at the time, you know, like Hammer horror and that kind of stuff. And again, it doesn't really quite fit into that, though, I think, does it? Like, so it's a really interesting thing. And I think that also applies to his character. He is this mad scientist. He absolutely is. And he is playing God. And he's doing kind of unspeakable things to people. But I think, like you said, Matt, there's that heart to him. There's a slightly more sympathetic side, or at least an empathetic side to him, where we kind of understand what he's doing and why he's doing it. So, yeah, I think in that way, the film has got more going on.
There's definitely there's something bubbling away under the surface that's really good. Definitely in Pierre Brasseur's performance of Dr. Genesier, that yes, you're right, he is much more calm and measured than a stereotypical mad scientist, but there's a real intensity just underneath. You know, when he identifies the dead body at the start and the other father is there, and he's incredibly cruel to this man who he's lying to, but he's just like, he's holding back some anger, even though he's just told him a lie for his own benefit, but he's like, leave me alone, you tosser. You know, like that's what he wants to say, but he keeps that calm composure like a mask, you know, like a placid, emotionless mask.
And actually that makes him more scary and threatening in a way. There's this feeling that all the way through, this man has everything completely under control. Like, he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows how to present himself publicly. He knows how to execute these plans in order to get away with what he's doing. And he really thinks that what he's doing is the right thing, I think, as well. So yeah, even though he's not your stereotypical crazy. He's there's something really menacing about him at the same time. Yeah.
I think this is an interesting case as well, because like you said, Mike, it goes to, like, your brain would go to the kind of B-movie territory of the time, because we looked at The Brain That Wouldn't Die a few weeks back, and that's a classic B-movie, schlocky.
Even the title, right?
Exactly.
Incredible. Yeah.
Came out 2 years after this one. So this is what people are used to. And in that, you've got a doctor who's committing lots of murders in order to save his wife and bring her back, bring her head a body. So it's a very similar premise to this. In this, you've got a doctor who's trying to fix the face of his daughter, who was horribly disfigured during a car crash. And he's doing that by murdering women and taking their skin, taking their faces to try and fix his daughter. So it's classic horror territory. It's also got a lot in common with Dr. X, which we looked at previously in the series, where again, you've got lots of murders happening, and it's like another mad scientist who is the murderer. And even in Time After Time, you've got Jack the Ripper, who is a scientist. He's a medical scientist, and he's using his surgical expertise to mutilate women. So you've got all of these scientists veering into the serial killer territory, which is where you get all of the horror from. And I think it's just it's a really interesting way of the two genres kind of blending into one.
Yeah. In many ways, it is also a serial killer procedural, right? You've got this kind of B-plot where you've got these cops trying to figure out what's going on with these missing women or these bodies being found, and they're on the case. And I think at the time, this was a real turning point in particularly in horror cinema. Like 1960 was a kind of massive banner year in how horror was kind of changing and modernizing. That same year, we also had Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Michael Powell's Peeping Tom. And both of these movies were kind of taking horror that had previously been like Gothic castles and Transylvania and monsters or aliens from outer space or like giant atomic bugs. Suddenly these movies were dealing with like human people and serial killers, and this was around the time that stuff like Ed Gein was making news in America, and there was this sudden realization that like, oh, there are people out there who look like normal, calm human individuals, but actually these men are doing unspeakable things behind closed doors, like they're murdering women in the shower or they're taking off their faces. And I think this movie kind of really fits that idea. Like it takes a lot of classic exploitation kind of horror tropes, but it's moved it into a newer era of horror, something that is more human, more serial killer based, and something that is more kind of believable, even though it's quite extreme.
And also, it kind of feels like a modernization of a Frankenstein story as well. I looking at it through that lens of horror kind of transitioning into a more modern, everyday killer kind of fear. In that sense, it feels like it's a 1960 updated version of the Frankenstein story, because he's piecing together living humans from not corpses, but he doesn't seem to mind too much what happens to the body after he's done his piecing together. And he's got this kind of like remote, it's expressed clearly that it is very remote. The film is set in Paris, but he lives somewhere that seems like it's like an hour's drive away from Paris. There's that whole scene where she takes the girl there. So it's got kind of Frankenstein's castle vibes as well, this remote place where he's able to do his weird science and do whatever he wants, really. So I felt that there was some updating of the Frankenstein story there for a 1960s audience.
Yeah, there's a really interesting, again, it kind of feels like a transitional moment in a way in terms of the genre, because yeah, you've got those scenes that take place in Paris or in the police station that feel a bit more like cosmopolitan. They feel a bit more like we're in 1960 France. They almost feel a bit like new wavy. And then you've got, like you say, the scenes in the big mansion where it's like we're in a big Gothic castle or something, and there's a basement and there's a dungeon and there's a woman being kept up in the attic and stuff. And suddenly it's more like we're in a haunted house or something like that. Yeah.
And again, you've got a doctor being this mad scientist, and a doctor is traditionally, again, a person who you'd go to fix you. But in this case, Dr. Genesier is trying to fix his daughter but he's not necessarily trying to fix other people. So there's this whole thing in this about, it's early plastic surgery, isn't it? I don't know how advanced plastic surgery would have been round about this time, or how popular it would have been. There obviously must have been instances of it for people which were like severely burnt or injured and things like that. So how do you guys feel about the way that they use surgery in this film, and how effective it is in sort of telling the tale?
Yeah, I think the surgery stuff is really powerful. And there's something with both these films, right? There's something about faces that makes something really powerful and kind of uncanny too, right? And I think both these movies make really good use of that, of the idea of like, it's very different if you're, I don't know, you're removing a limb or an arm or a leg or whatever. There's something about changing a face that it is like hard for us, I think, to kind of almost comprehend. And I think this movie does a really good job of kind of putting across the kind of uncanny nature of it, of what that means. Like, you've got this one woman who is, like you say, the daughter, who is kind of severely burnt, and she spends most of the film wearing this kind of white mask. And it's an amazing performance, actually, because her eyes kind of have to do all the acting. Her eyes without a face have to do all of the acting, right? And then, yeah, and there is this kind of beauty to it, but there's this kind of like, there's something quite haunting about it at the same time. And then the actual kind of sort of visceral reality of the surgery, and that really elongated scene where you see the surgery happen and you see basically a face transplant happen. It's amazing, right? Like, you don't expect that scene to go on and on and on for as long as it does, and you expect it to cut away at certain points, and it just doesn't. And you actually see like them cut around the face with the scalpel and take it off and everything. It's like, it's really kind of, there's something really profound about the themes of this film, but also just in a really visceral way. It's quite visually impressive.
Visually impressive, yeah, like really well produced, isn't it? Like great special effects for the time and the context of the movie.
Yeah.
I was quite shocked by it. I was the same. I thought, my first reaction was, oh wow, there's quite a lot of blood for a movie of this time period, and I kind of thought that's as far as it was going to go. And then we get a very detailed peeling away of skin, and what's the tool? Is it forceps they use? They kind of grab the edges of the skin and go one by one, lifting it up. It's very detailed surgical procedure, and gross and horrific, and you can feel it on your face as it's happening. But just brilliant production and special effects. It really, really took me by surprise.
It's very French. This is the thing. Like, French horror cinema is fascinating, and it goes all the way back to like the Grand Guignol theatre in the sort of 1800s, where like French entertainment, a lot of it was like, let's show you blood and really kind of transgressive images for its entertainment, and they were always kind of pushing boundaries. And I think there was probably a bit less censorship as well in France than there was in Hollywood, especially at this time. And so it's amazing just seeing how far they push it in that scene. Again, I don't think you'd have got that in an American-made again, if you compare that to Psycho, the same year, Psycho was considered pretty shocking because it actually showed a toilet and it showed a woman in the shower. Like, that was the most shocking thing about Psycho. So it's pretty hardcore for its time.
And it's also moving away. So you said it's compared to like old French theatre and the sort of like the theatre of the grotesque and all that kind of stuff. Whereas it's taken it into a modern day setting. It's this surgery, isn't it, that's happening. You've got this like clinical procedure, but it's still got kind of that gothic element to it. It's as with all of these mad scientists we're finding, they've got like a lab in their house somewhere in a basement, somewhere hidden away, their dirty little secret, and it's got this kind of dirty element to it as well. It's not quite this clean doctor's surgery, is it? It's this underground, almost harking back to Frankenstein in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think there's something really interesting in the way that the film is kind of scored too, because like that surgery scene has no music throughout it, right? It's just silent as well, which is interesting. It doesn't have any of that classic, like the sort of music you might hear in a Frankenstein movie or in a Hammer horror movie at the time. It has this kind of quite melancholy music when we're with the daughter wearing the mask, and then you've got this kind of like plinky plonky French music when women are being abducted, right? It's like
very jaunty.
Yeah, And so again, it's really interesting the way that it is dealing with all of this like grim, grimy subject matter, but also it's doing it in quite a beautiful way at the same time. There's like a weird dichotomy, I think.
It's got like an airy feel. It's very sort of poetic in the way everything's happening. And you've got these big murals on the walls. Christiane is all sort of floating around like some sort of wafy ghost in the background all the time. It's very sort of, it's got like an ethereal element to it, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the heart and the beauty and the sort of that poetic feel comes from the scenes with Christiane, doesn't it? Like the scenes with her are much more emotional and much more beautiful and are shot and lit. There's a kind of almost like, I don't know, there's a kind of mistiness. There's almost romanticism, I feel like, to the scenes with her compared to the grimy, gritty surgery scenes in the basement. Yeah.
Yeah, she glides around. I think, what did you say, James? A wafy ghost? I think that was a good description. But yeah, it is very gothic. It's very Victorian literature type character, this ghostly presence living up in the loft in secret.
How did you feel about her as a character? Were you on side with her?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're definitely like invited to sympathize with her, right? She's the kind of emotional heart of the film, it feels like. And they use so much kind of very on the nose animal imagery of like the birds in the cage and the dogs being caged and everything. And that is what she is basically, right? She's like an animal in a cage that wants to be set free. Even though she looks quite creepy. I mean, that mask is creepy, but at the same time, there's something quite emotional about it at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, she is the heart of it. She's this sort of perpetual victim that you are rooting for her, and it's a relief at the end of the film, isn't it? That Genessier gets exactly what's coming to him because of all of his transgressions, and Christiane also importantly escapes and seems free and moving on and not necessarily happy, but emotionally released from everything she's gone through. Yeah, I really like the design of the mask as well. Like she is scary in the mask, very Michael Myers, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Again, like that mask. There weren't many things like that before this, and then it became such a trope in horror cinema, and I guess in a lot of sci-fi too, right? That kind of android almost kind of look. But there's, I think in horror, it's been used so much, like Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which again is supposed to be an actual human face that he's wearing. Again, there's something kind of really uncanny about it. To Michael Myers, which is like you say, the really famous one where it is like it's a human face, but it's white and it's emotionless and it's got no eyes. And there's something about that makes us very uneasy in our brains, I think. And this is almost like that, except actually the difference is you've got these really expressive eyes, actually, which kind of give it a bit of humanity. I think the eyes are what give that character sympathy. If we didn't see her eyes, then she would just be this really creepy, like ghostly waif. But I think the eyes are what kind of make us care about her. Yeah.
Yeah, lighting it so that we can actually see Edith Scobe under there via her eyes, and not just the shadows, for example, in Halloween, Michael Myers. Yeah, I think that's a good choice. And you were saying earlier about her acting through that mask is brilliant.
Yeah.
Just creating this character for us. It does do this thing that I was slightly uncomfortable with, which is this, what feels like a really dated view of like the scariest thing imaginable is like someone with a facial disfigurement, you know? Like the mask is scary and creepy because it's uncanny and artificial and it sits on top of an actual face. But there's this big jump scare, I guess, in the middle of the film or a bit earlier where we see Christiane's damaged face, and she's not as scary as a woman in a mask. You know, she is just a woman with a facial injury, and she's healthy as well. She's actually, it seems to me that Christiane could be living a decent life, you know, and getting over her disfigurement and her accident, but because of the mad scientist being so mad and egotistical, he's kind of forcing this situation on Christiane. So it kind of works, but I was a bit uncomfortable. I don't know how you guys felt about that. The facial disfigurement being supposed to be scary.
Yeah, I think that's the one misstep in a way. Like, I feel like we never needed to see her face. I think, like, leave the mask on throughout the whole thing. Leave it up to our imagination what she might look like underneath that. And whether or not it is nothing to actually be scared of, but it's just this mad doctor that is projecting that on her. Or it is something so hideous that we can't even imagine it. You know, I don't know. Either way, I think it would have been better to not see behind the mask at any point, for sure.
I think it should be hideous in the sense that Genessier has basically told her it's hideous and created in her mind the idea that it is a hideous thing that needs to be fixed. But I agree with you that hideousness would work so much better if we can't see it and we only experience it through Genessier and Christiane's reaction to it. So they are convinced that she's a hideous monster in need of fixing. We don't need to see that because it actually just undermines that, because she isn't. She just looks like she has an injury.
Yeah. And it's like you were saying with the whole, like, it's that they want to show you these things in this kind of cinema. They want to show you these elements to try and get that scare factor out of you. But by restricting stuff, you're making it more poignant in a lot of ways. And you talking about the way that we see her eyes and how emotive they are, it just made me think of, again, like the way that you see in sort of like robots in sci-fi quite often. They're all sort of anthropomorphized, and even when we look at like CGI animals, they're all sort of made to look a bit more human. The eyes are the first thing people focus on. So it's like when you look at Wall-E is literally just a big pair of eyes. So it's all of those kind of aspects that we're seeing in a sort of like a very different way in this, but the fact that they're focusing on it through this mask really makes it very specific. But with that idea of the mask and not having her face, you've got all of these questions about linking body and identity together. And I think both of these films are really interested in that aspect of the science fiction element of it. Like, what happens when you don't look how you always looked, and what is this idea of the self? And I think it really gets into that kind of territory in that, which I think science fiction is so good at doing, but it's doing it through this very sort of like horror lens. So I wondered how you guys felt about the sort of the connection and the conflicts between body and identity that Christiane's dealing with.
I think the sci-fi genre is much better at dealing with this generally than the horror genre is. Like, the horror genre has quite a dated way, particularly around movies around this time, of kind of portraying, you know, again, the classic kind of Norman Bates, he's crazy because he loves to put on a dress and dress up as his mother, all the way through to like Buffalo Bill wanting to become a woman, and therefore he's a serial killer that has to wear women's skin and stuff. Like, there have always been these explorations of like, yeah, we'll talk about this with The Skin I Live In as well, because particularly with kind of transgenderism and horror and that kind of thing, there are some like, there have always been a bit of a sort of like, I don't know, slightly dodgy kind of connections in classic horror. But I think generally like sci-fi deals with this kind of stuff really well, doesn't it? This idea of like, what makes you, basically? Like, is it your brain? Is it your body? Is it your face? Is it all of those things combined? Is there something beyond that? Is there the existence of like a soul or something more spiritual? And I think at its best, this movie feels like it's kind of touching upon that again with those moments where we see those really emotive eyes. There's something almost quite spiritual about that. Like, people always say, don't they, the eyes are the window to the soul and everything. And there's like a, I don't know, it doesn't explicitly explore that in this movie, but it feels like it kind of touches upon that.
It kind of feels like the actions of the characters are holding back fully exploring that. Like they don't want to engage with that because of what that might mean, and they are quite restricted in quite limited ideas of what a person should be and look like, so they don't kind of allow that. I think the second film we look at gets into it a bit more, and I wonder if that is because of a post-cyberpunk movement and a different way of thinking about identity as it relates to bodies in science fiction. Maybe we'll see that change in the 40 or 50 years between these two films. But yeah, it's something very human about the way Genessier is holding back that thinking by being fixated on his ability to fix the physical elements of things and just make everything right with my science because I'm such a powerful, clever scientist.
See, that part's human, but him in himself is very, very sort of anti-human and anti-emotion, I feel. Like when he's talking to the guy who's looking for his daughter, knowing full well that he's just had her locked up and chopped her face off. It's like he's showing very little emotion. He's like, no, my daughter's dead. Like, blah, blah, blah. It's all about me, even though it's a complete front. And I think he's kind of got this almost sadistic nature to it, because is he really, do you guys really think he is just doing it to help his daughter? Or is he just driven by his own scientific hubris that he just wants to make this work?
Yeah, it feels a bit like she's his canvas, right? Like he's having a go at this kind of groundbreaking surgery, and he's using his daughter as a good excuse to do that, I think. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I don't think there's anything like Christiane. I think the film is still very much showing us that she is still her, right? Whether she has a face or not, she's still Christiane. Like, she hasn't lost her identity just because she's got these scars. It's him that's projecting all of that. It's him that is like, you need this, you know, again. And it's like, it's completely about his obsession. And you get the feeling that she is, you know, she'd be happier just out in the world, even with those scars, you know?
Yeah, playing Snow White with her mask on.
It is like Snow White, isn't it? Like with all of the birds and that kind of thing. But it's also got a tinge of Cinderella because she's like locked up, and all of this kind of thing it's like, again, it's the folktale aspect of it. It's got this kind of fairy tale nature to it, but it's also incredibly disturbing.
Yeah. And again, violent. I mean, if we're going to move on and talk about the ending, so we've had a really graphic surgery scene. We also have a surprisingly brutal and violent dogs killing a man, biting a man to death scene at the end.
Very satisfying.
I do kind of love, though, that those dogs just look really sweet, and like, it's just a scene where you've got these dogs just jumping on this man and their tails are wagging, but they've had to add in all these sound effects of like and everything, but these dogs actually look like they're having the most lovely time. But yeah, it is quite brutal. Again, like, it's the sort of film that if you describe it to people and you're like, it's about this mad scientist who abducts women, cuts off their faces, and at the end he's mauled to death by dogs, like, again, you think it's going to be much more of a kind of schlocky exploitation film that it is, I think. But this movie, as beautiful and artistic as it is, it does also show you those moments, and there is like a shot, isn't there, of his mauled face at the end. So I love that it goes there. Yeah.
and the ending is the perfect encapsulation of those two things you're just talking about, because you've got that violence of him, and it's cutting straight back to Christiane emerging from the wreckage, all graceful like a wafy ghost, you know, with the dove perched perfectly on her arm. You know, it's the juxtaposition of that imagery, the kind of beautiful fairy tale ending with a man being eaten to death by dogs, like literally within feet of each other.
Yeah. It's great. I love that. It puts it in quite an uncomfortable place. And again, I think made it very hard to market this film at the time. But it's great.
I think it's also interesting in the way that you're following it as an audience member as well, because you're watching all of this unfold, aren't you? Right from the very start, when you're seeing the body gets swept up into the ditch, you're not quite sure what's going on. You're sort of piecing the puzzle pieces together as it goes on. You're finding out about how Dr. Genessier is lauded over by the scientific community in a lot of ways, and especially his assistant. Is it Louise? So just like the way that she is so devoted to him and thinks he's so brilliant, and this is only doing like more for his inflated ego. So having all of that aspect to it as well, and just sort of watching all this unfold and then following the police detective trying to solve this. I think it's a really interesting sort of way of telling the story as well, just seeing it unfold in this kind of detective way almost.
Well, it's interesting that in both these films we're talking about as well, there is like a woman who is there assisting these murders or these kidnappings or whatever as well. And yeah, like they're not, these scientists are not just these kind of lone madmen living in the middle of nowhere. Like they kind of are more organized, right? They have like a surgery. They have specific kind of staff that help them with things. They have like a purpose that other people kind of believe in, I think, and help them with as well, which is really interesting. There's something more kind of organized about it, which again makes it quite scary. Yeah.
It also contributed to my feeling of it being an updated Frankenstein, because she's an Igor archetype, isn't she? She's the assistant who is completely bought into the madness, even though she is, like Genessier, like the whole film, she's very calm and reserved compared to Igor type characters that we've seen in other movies. But she's definitely within that mold, and so is the other character in the next film we'll talk about as well.
But the interesting flip with these, though, is that the sort of apprentices, the people which are looking after them, they're like motherly / lover figures in their lives, which just again goes to sort of add to the sort of strange psychology of these doctors, these mad scientists, the fact that they've got these kind of like almost, they need some sort of like motherly figure around them, or someone who is infatuated with them, who lords over them in order to function and in order to get that kind of validation in order to be doing what they're doing. And it's only making things worse, because having that kind of reassurance from someone that like, oh, well, I'm here for you regardless of all this weird experimentation you're doing, I think only serves to make it more dramatic. But it's like, then, like you said, they're not just loners doing these experiments on their own. They're actually capable of having relationships with people, however weird those relationships might be or sort of stagnated. It's got all of that aspect to it. So it's like the evolution of the sort of like the Igor character.
Yes, I agree with that. All of that. Nothing to add.
No notes.
So, Mike, you've hinted at the kind of legacy of the film. Why do you think this film has such an enduring legacy and influence on, I guess, mainly on horror, the horror genre, but sci-fi and other genre fiction as well?
Fundamentally, it's because it's really good. Like, it's just a really well-made film. The cinematography is beautiful. The imagery is really kind of, again, it's like fairy tale aesthetics, but also the gore, the body horror, the practical effects look amazing. It's French, and that adds a certain respectability to it as well, right? It just does. This was in that time of French New Wave and everything. And I don't know, there's just something about it that has like really stood the test of time, I think, generally. And again, like I would say that, you know, whether deliberately or not, it feels quite important and formative in terms of the imagery that we've seen in movies since, whether it's that mask, whether it's that kind of serial killer that is like doing these things, you know, that we've seen people like Buffalo Bill do in The Silence of the Lambs or whatever, these movies that again are always considered slightly elevated genre movies. In a way, it kind of starts here with Eyes Without a Face. Yeah,
I can see the comparisons. And I guess being French is one rung up the elevated ladder straight away, isn't it? It's a freebie in elevation.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, you zoom forward to the 2000s, where French cinema, again, had the reputation as being some of the most interesting, but also some of the most brutal horror cinema. Movies like Martyrs and Inside and High Tension. These are movies that are like very well respected and they've been really well reviewed, but they're also some of the most like horrible movies to sit through. And again, it kind of, you can trace that back to Eyes Without a Face. Yeah.
Well, you said there, zoom through to the 2000s. Shall we do just that and talk about The Skin I Live In then?
Hi listeners, hope you're enjoying the show. If you want to support us and get access to hundreds of hours of bonus episodes, you can sign up to our Patreon.
We've got discussions on all the latest sci-fi films in cinemas, the Bad Movie Bunker, and Patrons' Picks, as well as mini-series covering your favourite franchises.
Patrons get to have their say on what we cover, both over on Patreon and right here on the main show too.
So if you want to join, head over to patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi.
Now, back to the episode.
¡Párate ahí! Y tírame la llave de la puerta o sigo y te rajo. Si sigues bajando me corto el cuello y se te acaba el juguete. No eres capaz.
So Pedro Almodovar has called The Skin I Live In a horror without screams. Mike, do you think this movie fits more within sci-fi or horror, like body horror, or is it something else entirely, something entirely Spanish, I guess?
Yeah, it definitely feels Spanish, doesn't it? It feels very Pedro Almodovar. Like,
We can't
Pedro
just say
Almodovar.
everything feels like the country that it's
It's from the country it's from.
It does though.
It does,
I'll
though.
elaborate
It does.
why. Pedro Almodovar, who makes these like very, again, like beautiful, quite sumptuous movies. A little bit camp, a little bit melodramatic as well. There's something about them that almost feels like you're watching something quite soapy or like telenovela sometimes with some of his movies. And he's taken that style, but he's made it once again about a serial killer. Well, yeah, a mad scientist at least, who is again murdering people and kidnapping women and cutting off faces and stuff. So yeah, I think it definitely does feel like a horror film, but it is one that is, I guess, less explicit in what it shows, and it's more about the kind of unraveling plot and the twists and turns and the reveals that kind of give you more of a horror behind the ideas, I guess, of what's happening.
I think you're talking about Almodovar's sort of his films being a little bit camp in some ways. I think he does a lot of exploration of identity, sexuality, gender.
Yeah.
That seems to be like a lot of it's. There's a lot of, he's like kind of pioneered a lot of LGBTQ plus representation in his films as well. So I think that's really important in looking at this one as well, because it's a horror film, and obviously what happens in it is like it's a horror story. It's got all of those elements to it, but it's an interesting look at identity and how you view the self again, like we alluded to when we were talking about Eyes Without a Face. We mentioned this briefly. It's got all of that stuff to it. And yet it is very sort of like it's classic Almodovar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like kind of similar to what we were saying about Eyes Without a Face. This movie is dealing with really horrific subject matter on the face of it, but it's not set in a gothic castle. It's not in thunder and lightning. It's not shadowy or expressionistic. There aren't jump scares. It's like beautiful to look at, and it's kind of sumptuous, like in terms of the visuals, and it's kind of sexy in places as well, which in itself is quite difficult and uncomfortable at times, because also there's a lot of like really nasty stuff in here. So I think, yeah, again, like Almodovar very much like bringing his sensibility to this really horrific story. I think that's what makes it really interesting, though. And
we've got a much more modern mad scientist. He's a synthetic skin researcher. It feels very futuristic or just at least modern, doesn't it? How do you feel he fits into, the kind of mad scientist we've already talked about? So Genessier, and we were talking about Dr. Moreau and Seth Brundle in The Fly. It's
definitely another one of those examples of a man who thinks he's doing good, right? Like he thinks he's the protagonist and not the antagonist in his story. Like he thinks that he's helping humanity by, coming up with this like synthetic skin that is going to be impervious to burns and all of this stuff. Like, he thinks he's kind of helping humankind. Actually, he's not at all, right? He's this absolute nutter and I think even his own mother said that basically he was insane and a psychopath from birth, right? And it's, as it turns out, this horrific story of this kind of, I guess, almost a kind of rape revenge type story where he has decided to avenge what happened to his daughter by kidnapping a man and torturing him and mutilating him and then falling in love with him, I guess, as well, and becoming kind of sexually obsessed with him. So yeah, it's a fucked up main character, I think, but Antonio Banderas plays it in this way where, again, a bit like Genessier in Eyes Without a Face, he's quite calm and cool and collected.
But it's that public appearance aspect again, isn't it? The fact that on the surface of it, he's doing it for quite noble causes. His wife dies in a fire, in a horrific accident, and he's telling everyone, well, I want to create this synthetic skin so that no one has to deal with this again, and it'll be great for mankind. Will eradicate stuff like malaria because mosquitoes won't be attracted to the skin, and all of this sort of like quite cool on the surface sci-fi exploration of what could happen if you made a synthetic skin. But like you say, it's got these dark undertones because he's got other motivations and there's other things that are like bubbling away under the surface. Like even his relationship with his wife isn't what everybody perceived it to be.
Yeah, he's a proper wrong-un, isn't he? I think, and like that is basically what is slowly unveiled throughout this whole movie. And like again, there's a real kind of nasty character that comes into it in the first act, who turns out to be his brother, right? Who is this man who invades this home. It is almost like a home invasion scene where he like comes into this house dressed as a tiger, undercover, and basically attacks.
As a tiger, just.
Basically attacks and ties up and binds and gags his own mother, and then rapes this woman who is being held prisoner, and then his brother, our main character Robert, played by Antonio Banderas, kind of like thinks of himself as this like more humanitarian guy, but they're just as monstrous as each other, I think, in very different ways.
Yeah, I think Roberts, as a mad scientist, is a really interesting character, because I think there is a separation between his madness and his science. And a lot of the time we've been looking at these mad scientists, and that their scientific abilities kind of like feed their madness and feed their ego. But I think there's a bit of a separation here. I think his science is incredibly legitimate and impressive, and that's why he's able to present that way to the world. He has really developed this amazing technology in the synthetic skin, and his madness is driven by grief mainly. It's completely overtaken him and driven him completely mad. And then he uses his science, he weaponizes his scientific skills and abilities as a surgeon and all of that against Vicente / Vera, and uses it as a weapon and does all these awful things to him throughout the film. But I think there is a clear distinction between his madness and his science. He's not as traditional of a mad scientist as we've seen by far.
Yeah, weaponizing his ideas is a really interesting way of looking at it, because he's got all of these talents, like all of these medical surgeons that become serial killers. He's got the talents to do it. He's got the expertise, and yet he's using them for nefarious purposes to get his own way. And he's using them so the whole idea of the synthetic skin and the research, again, we're going to this idea of transformation. And that's something which harked back to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the mad science of the transformation. And this is it's a much more grounded transformation, like we had in Eyes Without a Face, but this is a successful transformation as well. This is something that happens over time, but we don't find out exactly what's going on in the traditional sense either. It's got this amazing narrative reveal, and the storytelling of this is brilliant, because you don't really know what's going on until sort of the midway point, and we start getting flashbacks. So like you say, Mike, you have this home invasion stuff happening. You know there's this woman kidnapped there. You think maybe it's the wife who was burnt, maybe he's doing experiments there, then maybe it's his daughter. You don't really know what's happening. And then they do this amazing reveal midway, don't they?
Yeah, I mentioned Psycho a lot with Eyes Without a Face, but this feels quite Hitchcockian in its plot, like the way that it kind of starts off almost feeling like one film, and it's a bit of a bait and switch, and then it turns out to be something quite different. I love the way that the plot kind of unravels in that way. I think it's really interesting, especially on that first watch. And it's really kind of using that idea of transformation and identity in order to shock us and surprise us, I guess, as well. And again, I think the film was criticized a bit for that as well, that it feels a little bit more exploitation-y, I guess, in that regard, and quite over the top and melodramatic in the way it plays those kind of twists. But it is a really fun watch, especially when you first watch it, the way that the narrative is structured. Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching this on my laptop. My wife was watching TV, so I just had this on my laptop next to her. And I said, "Oh no," out loud, like loudly, just staring at my screen about the 1 hour 15 mark. You know which bit. Like, it just completely took me by surprise, caught me off guard. The way it unwraps itself, plot wise, is incredibly well done, and I really just didn't see it coming at all. And I had to rewind like immediately and like rewatch some bits of dialogue from Vera early on with the additional context, and just like sitting on the sofa with my headphones on with like my hands on my head, like, oh no.
Yeah, I was like that in the cinema. And we were trying to remember earlier, like, did me and you see this together in the cinema, James? I've got a feeling we
I think
did.
we might have done,
but
yeah.
Yeah, and I remember being properly like gobsmacked by that twist when I first watched it. And it's funny, watching it again a second time, I was like, oh, this actually feels really obvious. How did I not guess this? But sometimes that is the case with the best twists. You watch them again and you go, of course it was this. Like, it was signposted, and yet you still don't necessarily get it. It's great.
That beautiful slow dissolve from Vera to Vicente when she's having the dream that seems to make no sense on your first watching. Yeah, that dissolve is lovely. But yeah, the film definitely purposefully wrong-foots you in terms of what's going on. I also think watching it immediately after Eyes Without a Face wrong-foots you a little bit, because I was in the mindset of a mad scientist father who believes he's looking after his daughter, and you know, the patient has a connection to him, and you know, maybe his intentions are good, that kind of thing. I was coming to it from that point of view, and I think Almodovar wants you to have a bit of that, but she is also obviously a prisoner at the start of the film. She's not allowed to leave her locked room. Yeah, but it all unwraps so brilliantly.
I mean, the film was based on Tarantula, wasn't it? It was based on a novel. So I'd love to know how that twist comes about when you're reading it as well, and what sort of like tense it's in and the perspective that you're reading from.
Yeah. I did look into the book, and I obviously haven't read it, so I don't know all about it, but my understanding is the chapters in the past are told from the first person perspective of Vicente, so you don't quite know why you're reading those bits of the story. So I think the twist probably comes at roughly the same pace, and you may not be expecting it in the book either.
Yeah, that makes sense. In a way, I can't believe that it was just based on a book from the 1980s rather than just a remake of Eyes Without a Face, because there are so many similarities. And I know that, you know, obviously Pedro Almodovar he had that film in mind. He said that he used it as an inspiration kind of thematically and visually, but it is almost like a remake in terms of the narrative and everything. At least that's how it feels when it's set up. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's the mask, it's the skin suit, the experimentations that's happening, it's the house lab setup, all of it. And again, like we said, the sort of like the helper figure who is like helping with the murders and helping with the kidnapping, knowing what's going on. All of this is just exactly like Eyes Without a Face, but in a good way.
But Eyes Without a Face is quite actually beautifully simple. Like, it actually very little sort of really happens. There's like a kidnapping, and then the rest of it is more about the mood, and we watch these long scenes play out, whereas this is like plot, and it's got this kind of melodrama feel to it, where it's like there's this mother and she had two sons, but they were separated, and then they didn't know about it, and then they came back together, and there's a lot of kind of like twists and turns, and it's much more plot heavy rather than Eyes Without a Face is a bit more like mood and atmosphere, I guess.
Almost extraneous amounts of plot, isn't there?
Yeah.
Like is his name Zika, the brother? Zika showing up and attacking Vera almost doesn't really need to happen, other than, you know, it's sort of just these awful things happening to Vera, and it's a sort of stacking up of that. But it's almost a red herring in terms of plot. And then to explain their whole backstory as brothers as well.
It's so confusing, because it's basically because he then has an affair with Robert's wife, right? And they're going to run away together. And then they get into the car crash and the car burns and the brother gets away and she doesn't, right? So it's all kind of interconnected, and they're all stepping stones towards this ultimate place where our characters end up. But yeah, you're right. It does. It almost feels like more complex than it needed to be in a way.
There's even a scene that so I watched it a second time just to get my head around it again, and watching it back, that one of the most kind of confounding scenes is in Vera Vicente's dream. After he leaves to go to the party, there's 2 or 3 minutes of dialogue where he's not there, where a man comes in to drop off clothes after his wife has left, not for the first time, and he's donating all of his clothes to the shop. And that scene plays out for like 2 or 3 minutes, and you know, the person who is recalling this is not present for it, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the plot. It's just this extraneous little bit of plot about another character that doesn't matter at all, but a wife that's left her husband feels somewhat relevant to the overall vibe of the film. But yeah, just that idea of extraneous plot, I found that scene really fascinating and confounding watching it a second time. What did you guys make of all that?
I think, again, it's this like puzzle of a film, isn't it? I think when you watch it for the first time, you're sort of taking mental notes of every bit of information and every character that is dropped, and you're constantly trying to piece it together. So in a way, I suppose those red herrings are kind of part of that experience. It's something that filmmakers like David Lynch do, isn't it? It's like, let's bring in all of these like random B plots, and are they going to matter or are they not? That's all part of the mystery kind of thing. And you get that feeling with some of the elements of this.
Yeah, it's very sort of deliberate storytelling, isn't it? So all of those aspects previously, when they're mentioning the wife and the daughter, and then they bring in this other man whose wife's disappeared, all of this is kind of like, oh, okay, it could be any of these people. You're never going to guess who it is. But when you do finally guess who it is, and you find out that it's Vicente, who is in fact Vera, you get this whole other reading of the film and the reading of the first half of it as well, don't you? Because all of Robert's sort of like leering over Vera and everything, you're suddenly getting more context into that. And then also it suddenly takes on a whole new meaning as to who Vera is, who Vicente is. And you've got this whole body and identity thing coming into play again, because Vicente, his entire identity has changed, and Robert kind of replaces his dead wife with Vera by using the same face. It's alluded to, it's the same face as dead wife. All of these kind of aspects really change how you're viewing it. How did you feel about the way they were dealing with those kind of concepts in it?
I think there's something really interesting on a superficial level about the fact that this guy's journey, Robert's journey of wanting to avenge what happened to his daughter, essentially, and using this man as his canvas for his mad experiments, essentially, actually then over the course of, I think it's 6 years, right, becomes something completely different. And actually what he's done is he has rebuilt his wife, right? Like, he has essentially turned Vicente into his wife. Like, there are loads of comments all the way through. I don't think we ever really properly see his wife, do we? There's a moment when she sees her scar in the reflection of the window. Again, it's quite reminiscent of Eyes Without a Face, but we never really see her properly. But that's something else that we get from the brother character, because when the brother turns up at the house, he's convinced that it was Robert's wife locked up in this room. So this journey of Robert kind of abducting this guy who did this awful thing to his daughter and torturing him and then avenging it and using him as his canvas. Then what actually happens is he sort of turns this person into somebody that looks just like his dead wife, and he sort of falls in love with her, doesn't he, as well? So I think that is really interesting. But ultimately, she remains, like, the very last line of the film is, I am Vicente, right? Like, she, this Vera character goes back to their mother and says, no, I am still me, right? So that person has remained the same despite all of these changes they've gone through. Yeah.
I found all of that quite heartbreaking, that from the moment you realise what's been going on to the whole final act of him escaping, basically, and then realising that any indication of kindness towards Robert was all an extremely 6-year-long con to escape, and that has been the only thing on his mind the entire time. That then just becomes heartbreaking. I mean, there's no way out of this plot that isn't heartbreaking. If he fully dissolved into Vera and accepted it, and even worse, fell in love with Robert for real, that would also be dreadfully heartbreaking. But that he's been kind of trapped inside that whole time, that the realization that that's the reality that we're dealing with, I don't know, I just found it incredibly heartbreaking. For a moment at the end, I thought that she had become Vera and had given up on Vicente, because when she kisses the missing persons photo, you don't kiss a photo of your younger self. You might kiss a photo of someone who's not around anymore that you miss, as a way of saying goodbye, So that gesture, I thought, oh, that's letting go of him and accepting that she's now Vera. But that's not the case. Then he goes back home to his mother and his old colleague at the shop. So there's lots of things going on, but all of it incredibly heartbreaking, basically.
And also like a little bit silly at times as well. Like the woman that works at the shop that Vincente used to be kind of really into, but she was gay. Now he comes back in the body of a woman, and there's this moment when they like lock eyes at each other and look each other up and down. And again, it's quite that moment in the midst of all of this other quite emotional stuff is like, oh, that's it's like, again, just like there's that campiness and melodrama to it as well, I think.
Yeah. And on the nose sort of kind of motifs as well, like the fact that Vicente works as a not a seamstress, but he's working in that kind of
like a dressmaker.
So he's doing that kind of stuff, and he's working in ladies' fashion, doing all of that, and then sort of he's being stitched back together as well. You've got those comparisons, but all of this does happen because of a rape, doesn't it? So the sort of like the rape revenge part of this whole story as well, we should talk about that. How did you feel about that whole scene and just all these teenagers having an orgy in the garden, just like at some party? I was like, what is going on?
That classic Almodovar stuff, wasn't it? What if everyone was just fucking outside?
I know. And again, there is something a little bit uncomfortable about that offset of like that kind of thing, isn't there? Like there is more sexual violence in this than I remembered, actually. Like the brother that comes in and sexually assaults Vera as well in the beginning. But yeah, I think it's interesting. And I love that it kind of puts you in this slightly uncomfortable place where you end up really feeling for and rooting for this person who earlier on in the film you saw sexually assault this girl at this party, right, as well. So, and there's this kind of this interesting weird thing that they have together, these two people, where she's been very unwell, obviously, right, and she's only just been kind of let back out into like socializing and going to parties and that kind of thing, and she has this kind of episode, and then he takes advantage of that essentially. But yeah, I think it's kind of uncomfortable, the way that it's all dealt with and the way that we kind of follow this character on their journey. But at the same time, it's kind of fascinating, isn't it? Again, it kind of makes you think about everything, all of the things we've been talking about identity and about like who is that person by the end of the movie and everything, and everything they've been through since that moment. Because
if it was your traditional kind of rape revenge story, you would be rooting for Robert the whole time, and you'd be like, yeah, teach that rapist, like, absolutely. But because it's got so many grey areas around it, and because of all of the stuff that happens, it's all the characters are really fleshed out in a lot of ways. Like, obviously, what Vicente does is, like, horrific. But then they kind of throw in all the extra stuff, the fact that Norma's going through a lot at the time as well. She's just come out of a psychiatric ward, and like he's really like dosed up on drugs. There's all of these other elements going on as well. None of it excuses any of it, but it's got these kind of bits in which are very purposeful to make you think, okay, is he actually an okay person? Is it just like what's happened there? Like where, because you feel for Vicente by the end of it, because his entire life's been turned upside down. He's like become a new person. He is a completely different person. He's unrecognizable. His friends and family don't recognize him. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think especially the way the film is structured, because the first act, we are watching this rapist, but they are the abductee, right? They are the prisoner. And so we are naturally kind of introduced to them as this character, who we think is Vera, who we are rooting for, who we want to prevail and who we want to survive. And then all of that gets much messier and more complicated as more plot points are revealed. But I think, again, like all of that is really fascinating. There's been like, not to go down this rabbit hole, but there's always been like a long tradition of like rape revenge movies in horror as well. And there are certain things that happen. Like there's a really horrible one from the 70s called I Spit on Your Grave, where there's a moment when a girl confronts her rapist in the bath and like cuts his penis off, basically. And it's really disgusting and grotty and visceral and horrible. And that film was like banned and censored and everything. But essentially, the same is happening here. Like Antonio Banderas essentially like abducts and kidnaps this man and then cuts off his penis as well, right? But again, it's like the whole film is wrapped up in this very different kind of structure and this different kind of tone that makes it really interesting.
Well, out of interest, I haven't seen I Spit on Your Grave. What happens to the man after he gets his penis chopped off? Does she kill him, or
Yes.
does he bleed out? Or
I think he passes. So it's in the bath, like, so she comes onto him and then, like, lures him into the bath, then grabs a pair of scissors, like cuts it off, waves it about, and I think he passes out and dies immediately in the bath. That's then full of blood, basically. Yeah.
because I mean, even so separating what you might think about capital punishment and like revenge and stuff like that on screen, I think it's great and it's satisfying to have like violent, visceral revenge on someone who deserves it. But I think there's that stark difference between chopping off a penis and then killing the guy in revenge, and doing it and then keeping them alive and psychologically torturing them for 6 years. Like it's this step that, well, not one step, but a series of steps that Robert goes down, that it's like anyone can agree, Robert, you went too far, man. You crossed the line a long time ago. This is madness. And yeah, it's the imprisonment and the psychological subjectation of subsuming his identity and removing it, and then physically rebuilding him and all of that. It's just it's utterly grisly, in a way that isn't a satisfying revenge at all.
No. And then just the way his obsession with her as well, like those scenes at the beginning where those really striking scenes when he's watching her on that massive screen, right, as well, and everything, and he kind of like keeps her looking perfect and pristine and everything, and all of that kind of, by the end of the film, you're like, oh man, this has just become 10 times more fucked up and creepy than I even thought it was at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, it's all very voyeuristic anyway, and like Almodovar's always casting like stunning Spanish actresses for all of his films.
Yeah.
But even so, like it's all very sort of like naked body. Let's have a proper look on the camera. And like you say, he's got this massive screen. Robert with his big old screen just watching her. Literally just watching her ass whilst he's sort of like on a chaise long. Just
Yeah. But again, there's something kind of slightly uncanny, not maybe quite as extreme as Eyes Without a Face, but she's wearing a skin suit, right? Like, so she sort of looks naked, but she's not. And there's something kind of interesting about that, about the way that she's presented physically as well. Like, again, from the very beginning in that skin suit, she looks like something that has been sort of molded and created almost.
But she also has no privacy, I guess, in that sense, like, because even when she's dressed, she's naked. Like she looks naked. That's the thing. And what's going on with all of her clothes as well? She's tearing them all up to make her sculptures, so she doesn't actually want to wear any of the clothes that she's been provided. She seems happier maybe in the bodysuit doing yoga all the time. Yeah. I guess it's that refusal to want to, be forced into this new identity, and part of that is wearing those dresses that I guess that character associated with his past, and something that women wore that he didn't, maybe, or something. I don't know.
It did make me think of, not to give too much of the podcast airtime to Kanye West, but his wife Bianca Censori.
Oh god,
so the way that he's like going, well, I think he chooses what she wears from the sounds of it. It's very reminiscent of this. Like, so he sounds a little bit like he's a bit Dr. Robert as well in a lot of ways, which is disturbing.
Yeah, fucked up. It is, in a way. It's a film about that kind of coercive control, isn't it? Essentially, that is essentially what the film ends up being about, and it's pretty disturbing and it's really uncomfortable to watch.
And also a tremendous advert for the power of yoga.
Oh yeah, I know, right?
It'll get you through. I could not, like, when she's writing all the dates out as well, I was just like,
I got Old Boy vibes as well, when he's locked up for 15 years and he's writing the tallies on the wall and he's working out and doing press ups and everything. It's like there's something very similar about that.
Like training to get revenge. So like Vera's doing something different. She's thinking of ways to manipulate Robert to get to a point where she can escape, because she knows that's the only way.
Yeah, she's ended up kind of emotionally manipulating him, and successfully, right? Where he essentially falls in love with her. He's almost forgotten who she used to be, I think, and almost thinks of her as his wife or partner, but in this kind of weird controlled scenario at the same time.
But it's interesting because we still refer to her character as Vera, as a she, even though it is Vicente, and Vicente is like is the person, is the human being still. It's very complicated with the sort of terms of identity that are going on in this, and just even how Robert is manipulating that behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's a real inversion of like a trans story, isn't it? Because this is something that Vicente has had imposed on him without his consent. He's been forced to undergo sex reassignment surgery and have his body completely changed and become somebody else. It's kind of the opposite, you know, whereas like we would expect a trans story to be about wanting to become to become your real self. This is about holding on to your real self while everything physically about you is changing against your will. And that's where the horror comes from, isn't it? The psychological horror of it.
Yeah. It's true, I suppose. In a way, it is a kind of twist on the trans story, because it ultimately ends up being about a person that is in the wrong body, right? That feels like they are in the wrong gendered body. But like you say, it's flipped the other way around. And again, that has been used in really clunky ways in certain other horror films. There is a 80s slasher movie called Sleepaway Camp.
Oh,
Have you guys ever seen that?
Oh, yeah. I was thinking
Oh
of
my God. And there's an amazing twist, spoiler alert, where it turns out the killer is a young girl, and she's a killer because she's actually got a penis. And that's the reveal at the end. But actually, there is something interesting about it, because it turns out that she's been raised by her parents as a girl because they didn't want a boy, they wanted a girl, and so they were forced to be a girl and forced into an identity that they didn't want to be in, and it ends up with all of these kind of schlocky, violent consequences. But there is something really interesting there in those sorts of stories, I think, about, like you say, like, you know, the self and the identity and gender and being in a body that doesn't feel like yours and all of that kind of thing.
And I think, again, going back to what we were talking about with cyberpunk's a really interesting genre for exploring that kind of stuff in sci-fi and allowing fictional universes where it's easier for characters to explore those thoughts without complexity. If you live in a world where you can make body modification and it's relatively simplistic or affordable, depending on how dystopian the setting is, you know, they can explore that more easily. So I do wonder if that influence, you know, this is so heavily influenced by Eyes Without a Face. We can see that, but I wonder if that cyberpunk movement in the 80s has influenced the thinking around what it means to have a body and what you can do with your body, and then what that means for your sense of identity.
Yeah, and Almodovar generally, like you guys said, as being this kind of this pioneering kind of queer filmmaker as well, taking those initial kind of story beats from something like Eyes Without a Face, but then how do you make that about identity and about gender in a different kind of way, in a more kind of, yeah, like you say, like a more LGBTQ plus kind of way. There's a lot of interesting stuff to explore in it, I think.
Gotta say though, guys, I wanted to find out more about the synthetic science skin. Like,
I know.
Like, what can it do? What can it do? It's like made from pig genes, and it's stronger than normal skin. Like, is she gonna be like invulnerable to stuff now? Is Vicente just gonna become sort of some weird superhero who can't get attacked by mosquitoes? Who knows?
And will he be able to remove that skin if it's so strong and resistant to everything?
Yeah.
If that's what he wants, I don't know.
I mean, what happens with that?
On a lesbian relationship.
I love that, James, you're like, oh, this could become like a Marvel origin story or something.
Look, it does feel that way though. The montage where he's in, I mean, his lab is lovely, isn't it? It's that perfect glass box, but it's inside a, you know, Spanish old brick villa basement area, but self-contained, like a little box laboratory. That looked amazing. And then, you know, we've got this brilliant sci-fi montage of him. You know, we've got test tubes, we've got drippers, we've got one of those centrifugal things that twirls test tubes around for whatever reason they do that for. You know, it's great sci-fi imagery. But yeah, again, it almost feels like another red herring, doesn't it? It's just a way into this story about changing someone's body.
Yeah, could 100% be an origin story for some tragic superhero, though. Yeah, the nerd in me always comes out at the end of these podcasts, one way or another. It's my true self.
Well, we hear enough about your true self on this podcast every episode, James. We've got a guest on. Mike, where can people learn about your true self? Where can people find you online?
Thank you. Yeah, you can find me on like Mike on Instagram and Blue Sky, or you can find my podcast Evolution of Horror wherever you get your podcasts. And actually, I'm about to go on a little break, but then my new series has got a lot of overlap with this series. I'm doing man-made monsters, so there's a lot of mad science stuff going on in that, as well as AI and other stuff that, again, very, very sci-fi-ish. So if you like sci-fi, hopefully there'll be a lot of good stuff to cover in my next series. So yeah, Evolution of Horror wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I am super excited for that series. I cannot wait, because one of the reasons I'm excited for that is we've probably watched a lot of the films already now, Matt, so we can just listen in and not have to do the homework every week.
Yeah, you guys, I'm going to be coming to you guys for advice because you'll have seen all of them probably, so perfect.
We're around, so you know where to find us. And if you don't know where to find us, you can find us online, guys. We are Journey Through Sci-Fi, and you can find us on journeythroughsci-fi.com, at Through Sci-Fi Pod, or on all the social media sites. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode.
If you want to support the show, a free and easy way to do that is to leave us a review with a comment. It's quick and it's easy, and it really helps new listeners discover the show.
And if you want a paid way to support the podcast, you can come and join us over on Patreon, and you get access to a whole abundance of bonus episodes. We've got mini-series, we've got different strands over there. Lots of fun to be had over on Patreon.
We've got Mike talking Poor Things and Twilight Zone and Nightmare. Was that on ours?
Yep,
Was that on yours?
yep.
Yeah.
Plenty of Mike content over on the Patreon as well.
And plenty more Journey Through Sci-Fi content coming your way very soon. Next up on the podcast, we'll be taking it back to the swinging 60s. We're going to be looking at The Absent-Minded Professor from 1961 and The Nutty Professor from 1963. Thanks once again to Mike Muncer for joining us on the podcast. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Mike.
Yay.
Journey Through Sci-Fi.